In this lecture, we are going to be talking about project identification and screening. If you recall, in the first lecture when I gave you an overview of project management, I discussed the life cycle of a project. And the first stage in the life cycle of a project was the birth of the project. How a project is identified and how exactly that project is undertaken for subsequent implementation. So we are going to talk about this phase of project identification and screening today, which is in fact a very vital phase because it governs the subsequent success of the entire mission. What does project selection consist of? Project selection as the first stage in the project life cycle consists of, number one, the problem of identifying a suitable project. This is a phase where you look around, you identify what your objectives are, you try to identify what your strengths and weaknesses are, and on that basis you identify the project to be taken up. We are going to be talking about this phase in great detail today, but you must link it with the other parts of project selection. So once a project is identified, the next phase is the phase of project appraisal, where you are trying to evaluate whether the projects that you have identified are actually worthwhile in terms of their financial capabilities, in terms of the objectives that you set out to achieve. So that is the phase of project appraisal. And incidentally, as you are aware, a project feasibility report is generally an outcome of the project appraisal activity. Every project generally has a project feasibility study done, and this particular project feasibility study is an outcome of the project appraisal which is done in the project. Once the appraisal is done, the culmination of this particular phase is the selection of the project. The selection of the project is a problem where you have already selected a number of or you have identified a number of projects. They have different characteristics and different accomplishments, and you are trying to identify which out of those projects is the best one. This problem of project selection is not an easy one. Why? Because there are a number of conflicting criteria involved. One particular project might be good on the front of the net present value, but might be a very risky venture. Another project might be less risky, but might give you much higher returns. So there are always trade-offs between conflicting objectives, and you have to take these trade-offs into consideration to decide on how to choose the best particular project. And in this case, the best is again identified by what you want to do. So it is subjective. It depends upon the priorities of the decision maker. And these priorities ultimately help us in identifying the kind of weights that we would like to give to various criteria, and in that sense this problem is. So identification, appraisal and selection. Quite often all these three steps could be done simultaneously, concurrently. For instance, when I go to buy a particular product in the market, I might immediately like it. That means I have already undergone an appraisal in my mind, and I might immediately select that particular product. But when you are talking about projects which have massive investments involved, you have to make sure that they are properly appraised, and then you have a formal method of selecting the right kind of project. So this is essentially the phase of project selection when the birth of the project takes place.
So here we can use the techniques of decision matrix.
Precisely. You can use the techniques of decision matrix. You can use any other criteria in operations research for choosing between the best option. So we'll in fact look at various multi-criteria decision-making techniques which can be useful for selecting the best project. Let us now look at this problem of project identification in a little greater detail. See, project identification begins with what your objectives are. Identification of the objectives. What is it that you want to accomplish? What are you trying to do? These are the kinds of motivating issues. So first thing is, you must be clear on what your objectives are. Then, after the objectives, there are two things that you must look at as far as your own strengths and weaknesses are concerned. If you are an organization thinking in terms of expanding into a new area, then you must consider what your current strengths are, what your current weaknesses are, and how you are going to live with these strengths and weaknesses with regard to the new project which you are contemplating. So, assessment of strengths and weaknesses is like a process of introspection, is like a process of looking within you. It's like trying to identify that this is what I am strong at and this is what I am weak at, and therefore if I undertake a project of this nature, will I be able to cope up with it with the kind of strengths that I have within me. So, apart from this introspection, you have to look outside to the world, to the environment, to the markets. And when you look at the markets and the environment, you are essentially looking for what are the new opportunities which exist in the market. What are the new threats which emerge as a consequence of maybe new technologies, new products which emerge, and so on. So you look at the opportunities and threats. So essentially what we are trying to do is, we are looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats. So we are doing what is known as a SWOT analysis, SWOT analysis, right? It's a process of looking within and a process of looking outside to identify these so that you can choose the right kinds of projects. And on the basis of this analysis, you have to do some thinking. You have to find out exactly achieve these objectives with the kind of limitations that I have and the kinds of strengths that I have under these opportunities and under these market threats. What are the kinds of project possibilities that can exist? So essentially, this is the process of project identification. And remember that this is not a process which can be made very systematic. It's a process which is essentially innovative. It looks for creativity in the individual or in the organization, and you are trying to look for new things which can happen. What are the new opportunities? What are the new kinds of things that can be done? And you look for these alternative project possibilities. So this is what we call the process. Broadly, this is a kind of an overview of what we are going to be talking about in detail now. So let us see, how do we search for new ideas? Basically, the process of project identification is a process of searching for new ideas. How do we search for new ideas? Obviously, we must first find out what are our objectives. Are our objectives to make money? Or do we have more philanthropic objectives? Are we trying to help people in disaster without expecting any monetary returns? So depending upon what your objectives are, your projects would be different and very different. Then once you have identified your objectives, invariably you will have to brainstorm to generate alternative solutions. Brainstorming is the process where generally a group would sit down and identify exactly what could be done to solve a given problem. So you are utilizing the vast experience base of all the members of the group, and you can consider various things. You can consider, for instance, what are the new market trends, emerging market trends. You might want to do a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis, a SWOT analysis, as we said, to identify exactly the right kind of solutions for your particular situation. You might consider any other constraints that you might have within you. And on the basis of this, you would probably shortlist candidate ideas for detailed scrutiny. This detailed scrutiny of the candidate ideas would actually be done during the phase of project appraisal. So you must first generate the ideas and then evaluate the ideas. So we are at the moment talking about generating these ideas, which would subsequently be shortlisted for a detailed scrutiny. This is essentially the process which is involved. What is the motivation for this? I think if you look at the motivation, we must realize that projects are a means to accomplish some goals. If you recall the definition of a project, we had said that a project is essentially a means to accomplish some goal or objective. And remember that these goals could be either individual or family objectives. They could be either or, they could be organizational objectives. Organizations want to achieve a number of objectives like growth, like diversification, like increasing their profits and things of that kind. There could be national or global objectives. So, really speaking, one must recognize that project identification actually begins in response to the specific need or the objectives. It is in response, that's the motivating force for setting up or deciding on a new project or identifying new kinds of projects. So, what could be the nature of these objectives? Here is a partial list of the kinds of objectives that companies may have when you are trying to conceive new projects. Your objective may be to increase profits, which is a very, very common objective, mundane objective really, right? And yet a very, very prevalent one. It could be to minimize the threat of losses. Quite often, new projects in companies are motivated because the sales of current products are declining, and therefore you want to introduce some new product which will be probably able to boost up the sales and hold the company together. So to minimize threats of losses could be one of the other objectives. To become more competitive. This is again a very, very major objective today. You know, today's environment is much more competitive than what it was 10 years ago. The markets have become more competitive, multinationals have come on the scene, and as a consequence, the companies which existed and were fairly comfortable while operating in a monopolistic mode now have to think in terms of becoming more competitive by either becoming competitive either in terms of their prices or in terms of their quality levels and things of that nature. So this could be an objective. You could have a quality improvement project within a company which could be motivated by this kind of objective. This is an example of a philanthropic objective. You remember the train accident which took place recently near Khanna when two trains, the Frontier Mail banged into, or rather it was another train that banged into the Frontier Mail, and there were a lot of people who were trapped. And in fact it was a project undertaken by the villagers there to help them out, to take out all the bodies at night, and the kind of work that they did. That was a project which was essentially a philanthropic project. And the objective was to provide help after a disaster. That kind of a project. So that's a project which was there. To train people in a new area is another example that could be undertaken of a project. You have, for instance, these days, a lot of people learning programming languages, and especially the latest craze is learning Java. And this is again a project which you could start training people in newer languages and so on, whatever it might be. Another project might be a very significant project which really needs to be done, is to reduce the pollution levels in Delhi, in a city like Delhi, where because of vehicular pollution, the living is becoming very, very difficult. So you could undertake projects to reduce this. That's again that's an objective which could motivate some projects. To become a successful entrepreneur after graduation, for many of the undergraduate students or graduating students from this institute, for instance, one of the projects could be that I would like to set up a factory of my own and be a millionaire very soon. And this is the project. And in order to implement this project, you have to undertake a large number of activities, but then this is a project in that sense. It's a personal project, personal improvement project. So this is just to give you instances of projects. Now let's see what exactly happens when you're talking about a SWOT analysis, or a strength, weakness, opportunities and threat analysis. Again, this is motivated by what your objectives are. It could concern things like what your experience is. What's the kind of experience that you have? What are the resources at your disposal? What are the environmental pressures that are governing the whole thing at the moment? And keeping all these factors in mind, an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats is made to identify and select suitable projects. So this is the broad idea behind a SWOT analysis. It's not done in isolation. It's done with the intention of identifying your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats so that you can undertake a particular kind of project or a set of projects. Now let's look at what typically would be the kinds of questions that you would be asking when you are doing a SWOT analysis. Some of the strengths. What do you mean by strengths of an organization or strengths of an individual? Typically, in the strengths you could cover things like what is your experience and what is your expertise in a particular area. This is a big strength. So you can take cognizance of this strength and then develop whatever you want to do. What is the financial position? How much money do you have? How much money can you raise? And therefore, as a company, depending on your financial position, you can contemplate what sort of projects you can go into. What's the amount of money that you can invest? That's a strength. What is your capital raising capability? We hinted at that. What are your industrial contacts? I mean, do you have a network operating with the major politicians or with the major bureaucrats or with the major capitalists in the country which can help you? So that is a strength. Do you have any foreign collaborations? So these kinds of things are parts of your strength analysis. Now, yes?
Foreign collaboration can be a weakness also.
Yes, it can.
We are dependent on them.
That's right. It can be both a strength and a weakness depending upon how you look at it. For instance, a foreign collaboration with a company which is very progressive and which has the latest in technology could be a strength because you have the greatest thing. But at the same time, a tie-up with a foreign collaborator could also be a limitation because it would probably mean that you are not independent or you cannot develop the kind of components that you need because you are dependent entirely on the supplier. So it depends, depending upon the context. Very right. Let's look at typically the kinds of weaknesses that might emerge when you are looking at doing an introspection. The unfamiliarity with new technologies could be a major weakness. You find, for instance, that this is the computer age. And if there is a company which is not aware of what is happening in computers, then it's at a terrible disadvantage. Inability to raise huge investments is also a weakness, because probably you would not be able to undertake various kinds of projects if you don't have this kind of capability. Lack of experience is in fact a very major weakness. For instance, if you want to delve into a particularly new area and you don't have any experience in that area, then you are at a terrible disadvantage, and that is a weakness for you. So you have to be careful. Lack of trained personnel in a particular area is again a weakness. Inability to forecast market trends. This again could be a very, very big weakness, because you don't exactly know how the markets are going to behave in the future. And if you are familiar with these markets, you might be able to predict to a fair degree of certainty as to how the demand is likely to be, because after all, the demand is one of the most crucial variables for any organization. So a capacity to know or predict the demand is something very important, and if you cannot do it, it could also depend upon the nature of the product, because certain products, the demand itself could be very difficult to predict, and especially if you are dealing with newer products, then you might have no way of predicting the demand. So these are some of the weaknesses that could be there when you're doing. Now let us try to identify what could be the typical opportunities that one could talk about in a situation like this. The opportunities could be the emergence of new technologies. Newer and newer technologies are emerging, and it is an opportunity. You see, this again could be both a threat and an opportunity, as you said. New technology is an opportunity because it's a kind of a vehicle for you to move ahead, but at the same time it's like a threat because it is trying to displace some of the existing products. Products are becoming obsolete, so it's a double-sided sword, really speaking, in that sense. But generally, an emerging technology should be seen as an opportunity which you should be able to cash upon if you can. New products with new markets are the opportunities. If there are new products coming up, you have new cellular phones now all over the country. So you can aspire to be a dealer for cellular phones in some country, in some city, or in some other cities. So, newer products, growth, newer opportunities mean potential for growth. New processes with better features. See, because of better technology, new processes may be developed which have better features, and they could be developing more in terms of either the efficiency or the output and so on. So you have better features. Special financing schemes could be opportunities. I am quite sure that at a personal level, this is the age when the consumer is enjoying a lot of opportunities. You find, for instance, if you're interested in buying a car, your project is to buy a car, you have special financing schemes announced by various banks and other financial institutions. And they would say, okay, you buy a Maruti free and we'll give you a gold coin worth 12,000 rupees free with it, okay? Or we will fit it with a video system totally free. So these are the kinds of opportunities which might come up as from time to time, and these are the opportunities really that come up, and you should take cognizance of these. Government and other incentives. There could be other incentives announced by the government from time to time. If the government wants to actually ensure that a particular area is developed, a particular backward area is developed, then it might start giving you some kind of backward area incentives, which is in fact an opportunity that is given to you to develop and set up your plants at that particular point of time, right? So you could have some of these opportunities. Now let's talk about some of the threats. I'm just trying to give you some ideas about what could be the typical things that one could talk about in a SWOT analysis. Competitors could be one of the big threats. to business. Right? New people coming on the scene, multinationals or otherwise, whatever it might be. The poor state of the economy could be a threat because people's buying power is low, they cannot buy products, and therefore no matter, even if you make very good products, there is, because of the poor buying capacity of consumers, there would be no demand. Outdated technology is a threat. Unprofessional management skills could also be a very big threat in today's competitive world. If you cannot manage professionally your organization, that could be the biggest threat to business. You will probably not be in business, especially when the scenario has become so competitive. And therefore it is necessary that you recognize these threats and try to do something about them. New products and services coming on the scene could be again threats. So we have tried to broadly look at some of the major considerations when one is trying to do an introspection to find out the strengths and weaknesses, and is trying at the same time to look outside to identify the opportunities and threats, so that you have a complete idea about yourself. Now, how do ideas come? How do ideas for a new project come? It's interesting in a particular study of how ideas for new products come. And in one particular study, it was stated that sources for new product ideas could be from a variety of sources. You could have the marketing and sales people coming up with an idea for a new product. And I think this part is understandable because the marketing and sales people are the people who are in intimate touch with the consumer, and therefore they know what the consumer wants and they can suggest that the new product should have these kinds of features. So source for new product ideas, marketing and sales department generally comes at the top. Then research and development. This is the department which has the mission of developing new products and new processes, and therefore by its very design it is trying to develop these. But you can see here that it's the sales and marketing people generally who exceed in terms of the total number of ideas generated for newer products, rather than the R&D people probably catch on an idea and then work on it, but that's the kind of thing. Top management is generally responsible for giving ideas for new products and also for new projects. I think this is understandable because top management is really concerned about it. They are concerned about the success of their business. They have invested their money into it. They would like to make sure that the money does well, and therefore they are attentive. They look forward to ideas from all sources, and that is how they get ideas and they contribute to ideas. The production department is sometimes giving you ideas about new products, especially those, it could talk in terms of either product simplification or substituting materials or making products which are simpler to manufacture and things. So they also come up with some kinds of ideas. And of course the consumers. Sometimes the consumers themselves say that. So the point is that if you look at a product, new product ideas come from a variety of sources, we have seen. Similarly, ideas for a new project can come from a variety of sources, and therefore if you are looking for ideas for a new project, you must keep your eyes and ears open. You must be receptive to ideas from all, from the top to the bottom in an organization. Anybody can give a good idea, and because the idea, once it is given, it doesn't really matter, as we have seen here. It could be from any of these sources, and it's only after a detailed appraisal later on you should determine whether that idea is really worthwhile or not. Okay. So this process of generating new ideas is generally accomplished through a brainstorming session. And how is brainstorming done? We'll talk about some of the brainstorming activities. You see, brainstorming is actually a way to encourage generation of creative ideas among individuals while they participate in a group. That's what it is. And this is a very important exercise, because on the strength of this exercise, or on the results of this exercise, hinges the performance and growth of the future company in that sense. So all the top management or the people concerned get together, let us say, in a group, and then they brainstorm, and the information that is provided is the objectives that you want to achieve and the SWOT analysis. So they have done a strength, they know their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and they know that this is what we want to achieve. It's a competitive scenario, let's do something about it. So how do they go about it? It's a brainstorming is, as I said, a good means to achieve this kind of innovation and to generate new project ideas. The interesting thing here is that this focus is on uninhibited participation by the group. I think the important thing to note here is that it is uninhibited. That's the key thing in a brainstorming session. When it is uninhibited, you are actually trying to encourage people to think creatively. You are not trying to curb their thinking so that they can come up with creative ideas. And listing of ideas is done without suppressing creativity at source because of this. So even if someone gives a silly or a stupid idea to begin with, the norm in brainstorming is to just record it and not to scoff at it or not to evaluate it at that stage, because that would in fact curb the creative urge in the individual. The list of ideas, once it is taken, is subjected to screening and evaluation subsequently. It's not evaluated there itself, but it is evaluated later. That is, I think, another point to be noted. And so what we do is we basically generate a group of ideas in which normally the members participate together, and once they participate together, each member would give some idea which is recorded, and once you have a sufficiently long list, at that stage you can suspend this process and then go to evaluation or to screening, right? That would be the general way of looking at the brainstorming exercise. So let me just mention how screening is done. See, screening of each idea could be undertaken based on some criteria. Say typically one could think in terms of criteria like what is the cost of the idea, what is the risk involved, what is the return if I implement this idea, and is it a hazardous thing? Does it mean a threat to life or property or groups of people? This kind of thing. Let's say, so you could have a variety of other criteria, and for each criteria you have a sheet like this. You can probably tick each idea by saying whether it is poor or fair or good or very good or excellent. And maybe if you use a 5-point scale, poor could be given 1 mark, fair could be given 2 marks, good could be given 3 marks, very good could be given 4 marks, and excellent could be given 5 marks. So what we do is, we say, for instance, this particular idea that we are evaluating on the cost front is fair, right? So we put fair there, and the moment we put fair in that particular idea, I mean, it's like saying, okay, we have taken this as we give here. Similarly, as far as this idea is concerned, as far as riskiness is concerned, it's not very poor, it's quite good. So we put a mark there. On the return aspect, we find that it is very good. So we put a mark there. And on the hazard aspect, we find that it is fair. So it's like this. What can be done is that these individual criteria that we were talking about could have different weightages depending upon management's priority. Let us take, for instance, that management wants to give a weightage of 20% to cost, 30% to risk, 40% to return, and 10% to hazard. Then the total score for this particular idea would be 2 into 0.2, 3 into 0.3, 4 into 0.4 plus 2 into 0.1, which is 3.1. So you have a means of quickly on one particular sheet identifying how much this idea is worth. It's got 3.1 points. So you can evaluate all these ideas, and that is a screening analysis, because we are not subjecting it to any great kind of appraisal. We are not trying to find out what the profitability is or what the risk is. We are just doing a broad screening of ideas to eliminate the so-called ridiculous ideas from the non-ridiculous ones and do this. What could be the typical criteria that you could have in screening? Some of the important criteria that you have in screening projects could be the investment, the rate of return, the risk, the likely profit, the payback, similarity to existing business, expected life, flexibility, environmental impact, and competition. Of course, there could be many more criteria, but this is only a kind of a list that tells you that you could be screening projects on the basis of these criteria, and you could do this kind of analysis. Now, look at the process of screening these ideas. You see, what happens really is, we can see that project ideas, if we plot, for instance, the number of ideas are here. On this axis, and let's say we have time on this axis. Then typically we find that the number of ideas, what really happens is that we brainstorm and we generate a number of ideas. Maybe we have generated some 50 ideas. These ideas are now subjected to a process of screening. And during this screening, which goes on from here to here, let us say, you have screened the ideas and you have roughly half to 1/3 ideas are left only during the screening exercise. I generated a large number of ideas during the brainstorming, and during this exercise, the number of ideas left is less than half or 1/3 even. These ideas which have undergone a screening are subjected to a more rigorous appraisal, which is what we will be talking about next time. In the appraisal process, you look at the market appraisal, the technical appraisal, the financial appraisal, the ecological appraisal, the socio-economic appraisal, and the number of ideas, the casualty rate is much smaller here. And finally, after you have done an appraisal, you have a project feasibility report of 3-4 tentative projects. So ultimately you select a project here. So selection is here. And at the end of this selection, you have basically one project which is chosen for implementation. So this is the project chosen, which you start implementing. So I think this would give you an idea of the successive stages through which various ideas pass before you get a successful project. We are discussing at the moment this phase today, project identification and screening, and how you get this particular idea. You see, as far as in new products, there is an interesting result which states, one study indicated that out of 35 new project ideas, only one made it to the final product. So what it really means is, if you look at this particular diagram, there are 35 ideas here and only one makes it finally to the final project. So I think we have now discussed the basics behind the process of project identification. I think it would help if we take a small case study or a small example problem to do this exercise and see how we can actually apply project identify new projects and so on. So for that, let's think of a broad objective, and one objective that we can all probably work with is, let us look at this problem of reducing vehicular pollution in Delhi. This is our objective. Let us try to identify projects for this. Okay. Now these projects, that means let us undergo a kind of a brainstorming, and all of us will try to identify some kind of a list. So obviously maybe one particular project that could be identified is restrict registration of new vehicles. That means we don't want to, instead of stopping production, you can assume that production of vehicles takes place where it goes to unpolluted cities, but to polluted cities we don't allow vehicles to enter. Restrict registration of new vehicles could be one way of dealing with this, let us say, the first exercise. We will evaluate it subsequently, go through a screening and find out what is the best. Another objective could be enforce strict emission regulations for vehicles. This could be done. The police could be going around the city and doing detailed checking of your exhaust, and there could be severe penalties for not conforming to the emission regulations. We have this being done. In fact, the government does it off and on, and sometimes it gets very strict and then it gets very lenient and so on. But then this is another project that could be undertaken to do this. A third project could be probably ban diesel run vehicles on the road. This could be done because diesel vehicles, as you know, are responsible for much more pollution as compared to the other vehicles, and in fact this could be a project which could be undertaken. Third idea. Fourth idea could be to introduce a mass rapid transport system for the city. In fact, as you know, the government has been toying with this idea of making a mass rapid transport system for the city, either a tube railway or a tram system or something. So let's talk of some mass rapid transport system for the city, so that this would then discourage people to use their private vehicles, and they would use this, and hopefully the pollution will go down. Let's talk about fifth project, encourage use of carpools. See, large number of people drive to their offices independently in cars. They could probably coordinate and use more of carpools. That would reduce the number of vehicles and so on. Another option could be, sixth project that we have identified is, we are identifying projects, right? Grow more trees or green belts in the city. This could be another project which would possibly improve the environment of the city and cut down on pollution. This is project number 6. Then let us talk about, see what else could be done. A seventh project that could be identified is declaring no traffic zones in the city. When you can identify some crowded areas like Chandni Chowk or maybe near Connaught Place, and you say that no vehicle will go there and people will park their vehicles further and it will be only walking. This kind of a strategy is there not only here but in many European countries as well, in many parts of America as well, where you have only no traffic zones, so people only walk there, that's all.
Trade fair, they tried this here in Delhi also?
Yeah, in the trade fair they tried this, yes. And I was a victim to that because I had to travel to walk something like 4 miles to get to the trade fair once. Anyway, so there are social costs associated with this option. And let's say the 8th project idea we have is ban vehicles with an age of 10 or more years from plying on the roads. Because this would obviously mean that you would not get into those kinds of problems with old vehicles generating more fumes. So this is just a tentative list, and these and more ideas could be generated through a brainstorming exercise. You could generate more. So we will take only in this particular case look at only these 8 ideas. We have generated or identified these 8 project ideas after doing a brainstorming, after thinking about what can be done. So let's now do a screening analysis to find out which out of these would we like to consider more seriously. So in the screening of these ideas, first thing that you have to decide upon is what are the criteria that you would like to choose. In this case, what are the criteria that we are going to use for screening? Let us say that for a quick screening, we would like to see effectiveness to achieve objective. That is, how good is this project, how effective is this project to achieve the objective, which is to reduce vehicular pollution in Delhi. I hope you know the difference between an effective project and an efficient project. Effective project is one which accomplishes the goal for which it was assigned to do. And an efficient project is one which is done as per plan. So you could be doing an ineffective project efficiently, right? But it's more important to select effective projects for implementation and for national growth. So effectiveness, cost of the proposal, ease of implementation. In these costs and ease of implementation, we can take not only monetary costs but social costs also, generally. And then what is the time needed for implementing this solution? So we will work on these 4 criteria. Implementation, that is effectiveness, cost, ease of implementation and time. And this is an illustrative list. Of course, other criteria could be added if needed. The scale of evaluation is again a 5-point scale where 0 is very poor and 5 is excellent. So when the effectiveness is low, we give 0, and when it is very high, we give 5. Cost, when it is high, we give 0, and when it is low, we give 5. So cost is basically a cost criteria, these are benefit criteria. So they are in that sense. Implementation ease, if it is difficult, we give 0, and if it is easy, we give 5. And this is with reference to the 8 projects that we are trying to talk about. Time, when it is maximum, we give 0, and when it is minimum, we give high value. So this is the way we construct the scales of the criteria that we would like to evaluate. Based on this, we would then like to do the scoring of the alternative projects. Let's see that. See, what can be done is, say, take the first project, which is restrict registration of new vehicles. Effectiveness, we feel that is going to be quite effective, very effective in fact. So we give 3 marks on that front. And as far as cost and implementation are concerned, we feel it's going to be very costly and difficult to implement. So we give only 1 here. And as far as the time is concerned, we think it's going to be fair, so we give 2 marks. And assuming that all these criteria are equally important to the decision maker, the total score for this project is 7. Right? 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2. Similarly, we evaluate all the projects. Enforce strict emission regulations. We feel that this is very effective. Its cost is low, so we have given a high mark here, 5. And it is implementation is also easy, relatively, 4. And time is, in small time you can implement this, so this is 5. So this gets a score of 18. Similarly, ban diesel run vehicles on the road. It may be effective, but it's very difficult, costly and difficult to implement. And the time is fairly high, so this is 7. And yes, a mass rapid transport system could be very effective, so we have given 4 marks there. But cost and implementation, we feel that it's very poor. Probably the government will not be able to implement this kind of a system. So we have given it 0 here and 1 as far as implementation difficulties are concerned. And time is going to be very large, so we give 0 here. Or you could give 1, I mean whatever you feel is appropriate. The idea is that this project then, by virtue of this, although it could be very effective, could get 5 marks from that point of view. And finally, we do a similar exercise for all the 8 projects. Encourage use of carpools, 15 points. Grow more trees and green belts in the city, 13 points. Declaring no traffic zone, 9 points. Ban 10-year and older vehicles, 11 points. So this is the broad methodology. And finally, the result of this exercise. What is the result of this exercise? The result of this exercise is the following. we have identified the 3 top projects out of the 8 that we had brainstormed. So the first project is enforce strict emission regulations on vehicles, which gets 18 points. And we have identified this project as number 1 in that sense. Encourage use of carpools is the second one, which comes out at 15 points. And grow more trees and green belts in the city comes at 13 points. So this is essentially the idea of screening. So through this example, we have been able to illustrate how we can identify projects, different projects to accomplish a goal. We thought of that list and we generated 8 projects. That was a creative exercise. You won't have a method for doing it. You won't have an LP program which will do that. You have to think and identify what the projects are. And then we subjected them to a screening analysis. We tried to identify what exactly could be done in that front. And we identified the 3 best projects. So these are the ones which are available after screening. Now these would have to be appraised in terms of their financial, technical, market viability to, and then we could go ahead. So basically what we have tried to do today is look at the project identification process in a fair amount of detail. We have seen, for instance, that the project identification begins with the objectives. What are your objectives? What is it that you want to do? And at the same time, it is very essential to look at your internal strengths and external strengths. Looking within will identify for you the strengths and weaknesses. Looking outside at the environment will identify the opportunities and threats, and you do a SWOT analysis in that system. And on the basis of this SWOT analysis and the objectives, you can conduct a brainstorming exercise. In fact, we did conduct a brainstorming exercise for an example of reducing the vehicular pollution in the city. The purpose of this brainstorming exercise is actually to identify some project possibilities. So in this example that we did, we identified 8 project possibilities. These project possibilities are then funneled through a screening exercise, and this screening is based on some criteria. We chose 4 criteria for doing this screening exercise. And subsequently, as a consequence of this screening, we have a set of candidate project proposals, which in the example that we were doing, we had only 3 major proposals which could come out of the whole exercise. So I think this is the whole framework of project identification as we look at it. Now if we try to summarize our discussion today in this lecture, we can see, for instance, that the first thing that we probably identified was that project identification is generally done by brainstorming exercise, where people utilize their valuable knowledge base and experience to come up with innovative ideas, right? Then the broad objectives guide the brainstorming. What you want to achieve, that will obviously guide the brainstorming process. Introspection is necessary to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the system, right? I think this is clear. And looking outside towards the environment provides new opportunities and threats. So you have to look for new opportunities and threats outside the environment. And evaluation of ideas, this is an important point about brainstorming. Evaluation of ideas is suspended during brainstorming to encourage creativity. And a subsequent screening on relevant criteria produces a candidate set of projects for detailed scrutiny. So this is it. And an exercise was undertaken to illustrate the procedure that we this particular procedure that we have. So this is the broad concept of project identification, and we will talk about project appraisal and project selection in our next lectures.